Hello fellow e-bike enthusiasts. I believe I am finally done with my Freesky Swift Horse custom build. In this video, I am going to go over the parts that I have changed and the modifications that I have made. In my opinion, the Swift Horse is a well-built bike, and in its stock form, the bike will satisfy riders who are looking for an affordable, well-built bike with plenty of power, a great range, and a comfortable ride over most terrain. My goal for this build was to have a bike that works well for long scenic rides on and off-road with my wife, and can also handle the technical trails that I enjoy riding on my analog bike. So far, I am happy with the results. Let's get started. I am going to start with the most obvious change, and that is the custom paint job. The paint that came on the Freesky Swift Horse is actually really good paint, and there was really no reason to paint it other than I just wanted something that is unique, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to make it match my truck. The painting process actually went really well for me. I basically sanded the frame and the subframe down to where you can no longer feel the original stickers, the edges of the original stickers. And then I primed it with a fillable, sandable primer. Put 2 coats on, then I sanded that with 800 grit wet dry sandpaper. And then I sprayed 2 coats of the color coat, which is a Rust-Oleum lacquer paint, and it's Nardo Gray. And then I applied the decals that you see here, my custom decals on it. And then finally, I sprayed 2 coats of a 2K 2-part clear coat. And this went on very well. You can see how glossy this is. It looks wet. And what you see here is the final result, which I'm very pleased with. The upgrade that I recommend the most, and I think this applies to whoever owns one of these bikes, whether you're doing more trail riding or even on the street or commuting, is to upgrade the brake rotors on this thing. It comes with 160 millimeter brake rotors, which are pretty small for a bike that weighs over 80 pounds. What I've done here, you can see this is the back rotor, is I put a 180 millimeter rotor on this. And again, all the parts that I mentioned here, there will be links to them in the description below. And putting bigger rotors on the front and rear meant putting these adapters that you see here. These are Bucklos adapters, and they're Bucklos rotors. And again, this is 180 millimeters on the back. And the front, I went with 203 millimeter rotor, and you can see the appropriate adapter there for that. And the reason for the difference between the front and rear rotor size is just kind of traditional. About 70% of your braking happens on the front rotor. And so traditionally, mountain bike manufacturers will put a bigger rotor on the front than in the back. That is, however, not necessary. You could easily put a 203 millimeter rotor on the rear too. There's no real significant reason not to, in my opinion, but your opinions vary on this topic, and you'll find that if you go do some research on it. The second upgrade that I think applies to everybody, whether you're commuting on it or whether you're riding on the trails, if you experience a lot of flat tires, I highly recommend the Tannis Armor Flat Tire Prevention System. You can't see it obviously because it's inside the tire. When I first bought the bike, I experienced a flat tire within the first couple of weeks because we have goat head thorns around here. And so if you experience similar issues, or if you ever had a pinch flat, if you're riding through rocky terrain, the Tannis Armor system helps prevent both pinch flats as well as thorns, flats from thorns or other road hazards. I've already pulled several of the goat head thorns out of these tires after installing the Tannis Armor, and no flats so far, so I'm happy with them. They're a little bit expensive, but hopefully it's a one-time purchase. The next upgrade that I did is actually behind this cover that you see here. This is where the controller for the motor is. I found when I was going on any sort of rough terrain at all, the controller bounces around inside this box. So I custom cut some foam rubber and put it around the controller to prevent it from clanking around in there. I'm sure eventually that could or possibly cause damage to the controller or the wires coming out of the controller. So that's something that I think is easy enough to do and probably worth doing. Another upgrade that might apply to you whether you ride on the road as a commuter or whether you ride single track trails or even just off-road trails in general. If you're not comfortable with the handlebars, the handlebar width on these is a little bit narrow, and so I've upgraded the handlebars to these wake bars, and these I purchased the 780 millimeter and I cut them down to 760 because that is the correct size for me, and so that's a good upgrade. And also, if you are not a fan of the big cushy type seat, which I'm not for trail riding, I like having a narrower, smaller, lighter weight seat that gets out of my way when I'm cornering and going downhill. The seat is also a decent upgrade. And again, that's personal preference. This is the cap bow that I purchased on Amazon, and again, the link will be below. I also upgraded the grips. You can see here, it partially because I wanted the red accents to match everything else, but also I wasn't getting used to those ergonomic grips that were on it. Again, that's personal preference. And a link for these grips that I purchased, and I'm happy with them so far. I haven't had them on there for very long, but the installation went really well and they appear to be built very well. But the link will be in the description below. The remainder of the upgrades I'll be covering are to make the bike better suited for the trail riding that I do. If you see my other videos, you know I like doing uphill, downhill, single track. I've been doing that for a lot of years, and these upgrades make that a better experience for me. I'm going to start with the dropper seat post. This was actually a pretty affordable dropper seat post. It actually has the lever to raise and lower it is under the seat here, which at first I wanted the handlebar mount style, but then I came to realize that this handlebar is already pretty busy with all of the electronics and brake sensors and everything like that. And so I decided that this was probably a better solution, and I'm happy with that. This so far, I don't have a lot of rides on it, but I'm very impressed with this considering the price. And again, the link for this is below. Over on the drive side, you're going to notice a couple of changes here. The first one being I replaced the stock 170 millimeter crankset with a crankset that is 152 millimeters, and I also changed out the chain ring to a chain ring with 44 teeth. The stock one has 44 teeth. The new crankset actually has the 4-bolt pattern, which allows me to replace the chain ring if I ever have to. My motivation for changing out the chain ring and the crankset, there's a couple of things. Number one, I was getting a lot of pedal strikes with the 170 millimeter crankset on rocks, and so I didn't have enough clearance between the bottom of the crankset and the pedals and the ground, and so that was kind of a problem for me. But also, the combination of the two of these gives me more climbing power. So I lose a little bit of top end speed, which is okay because I use this mostly again for trail riding, and top end speed isn't an issue there. This isn't a commuter for me or anything like that. But it gives me more climbing power essentially on the bottom end, which I think is great. The other piece that I had to install here in order to make this work, because the stock setup comes with chain guides built onto the chain ring, and it's also kind of a bash guard, but it's plastic, so it's not going to really prevent a lot of damage to the sprocket if you hit it. But I don't want the chain to come off, so I installed this aftermarket chain guide. And again, I have a link for this below. In order to make this chain guide work, I actually had to do some custom mounts here. You can see there's some spacers back there in order to get it positioned correctly, but you can see it's lined up just about perfectly with the chain. It also has these spacers right here that you can add to pull it out or push it in a little bit further. And it also has a slider so I can lift it up and down to get it in the right position vertically. And finally over here you can see I replaced the stock pedals with these Maraca pedals, which they're a lot more grippy. You can see on here it has the spiky grips on here. The stock pedals were good. They seemed like they were built well, but they were a little heavy, and also it had built-in spikes here, and I found my feet slipping off them more than I'm comfortable with. And so far these have been good. I don't have a lot of miles on them, but I'm pretty happy with their performance considering their price. While I'm back here, I want to point out something that's a little bit unique to the Freesky Swift Horse, and that is that the bottom bracket on this, which is kind of the bottom mount here, so this would be kind of the center of the bottom bracket, is pretty low, which has an advantage and it has some disadvantages. One of the disadvantages, which I already mentioned, is that doesn't give you as much clearance, so you end up with pedal strikes, you know, but shortening the crank arm, like I said, is going to help with that. The advantage to it is that having your center of gravity, essentially your body weight, lower on the bike makes it more stable in corners. It gives you more grip in the corners, so there's a little bit of a benefit to that. A lot of bike manufacturers are lowering their bottom bracket a little bit in order to get that extra traction in corners. The last downside is that doesn't really give you a lot of clearance, especially with a smaller chain ring between the chain and the bottom of your triangle here. I have a triangle protector here that I'm going to put in that prevents the chain from beating up this paint. It's not installed right now, but it will be installed. But you can see here that's not a lot of clearance there, but it should be okay with that protector on there. The final upgrades that I'm going to talk about are to the suspension on this bike. So when I first took this bike out on the trails, it was immediately obvious to me that the rear shock here and the front fork were not going to be good for trails because they had no rebound control. And so they topped out very harshly and they bottom out also very harshly. Which is to say that the fork and the shock return so quickly after being compressed that it's loud and it almost feels like you're going to damage your bike. And so because they didn't have any rebound control, I wanted to get those upgraded right away in order to be able to ride it on the trails. And I chose this D&M. It's the AOY 36RC rear shock, and it has a low pressure and a high pressure setting on it. They're both, the fork I have and the shock are both air. They have air springs, but it also has this rebound control here and a lockout switch here for it. But I'm very pleased with this shock. It's the 165 millimeter, which is a little bit longer than the stock, which was 150, which ended up kind of bringing the bike up off the ground a little bit, which is fine. But in order to keep the same geometry, I also brought the front end up a little bit by having a longer travel fork on the front, but I'll cover that in a second. But I'm very pleased with this shock. In the future, I may do a video on how to set up the air pressure properly, because when you apply pressure to this and you release your shock pump, oftentimes it drops the pressure back down to a level that is not appropriate for your weight. So there's a few tricks I have on getting this adjusted correctly. But once I got this dialed in, I'm very pleased with it. It performs every bit as good as some of the higher end shocks that I have on my other mountain bikes. If you watched my first upgrade video, you know that I upgraded the stock fork to a Himalo dual crown air fork that had rebound capabilities to prevent that harsh top out that I had mentioned earlier. Since then, I've splurged and purchased a higher end fork, and this is the Manitou Mastodon fork, which is pretty much top of the line fat bike fork. And this is their Pro Standard model. It has an adjustable travel from 120 millimeters, I believe, up to 150 millimeters. I have it set to 140 millimeters because that puts the geometry where I want it. I mentioned the geometry a little bit earlier with the rear shock. Since the rear shock raised the rear tire a little bit, I was able to raise the front end a little bit and get the head tube angle where I want it, which is essentially this angle right here to where it's about where I want it, and the bike feels really good. I think the head tube angle on this right now is about 67. I think stock it was more like 69, so this is a pretty good head tube angle for me. It's a little bit slacker, which gives you a little bit more high-speed stability. As part of the fork upgrade, I had to upgrade a couple of additional components in here. The first one being this headset. You can see here this red headset. So this fork is single crown, obviously. It doesn't have the second crown on top here, but it also has a tapered head tube, which is the tube that goes through here. It is 1.5 inches diameter on the bottom and 1 1/8 on the top, where the stock head tube is a straight tube, so it's 1 1/8 on the top and the bottom. So that means the bearings have to be different inside here. Also, this new headset has sealed bearings, which is an improvement over the stock, which doesn't have sealed bearings. It has open bearings. The sealed bearings help prevent getting dust and dirt in them. So I think this was a good upgrade here, and it's pretty affordable. This is a Jessica headset that I bought on Amazon. And again, the link will be below for that. Also, I had to replace the wheel on this because this new fork has a 15mm through axle, where the stock setup, stock fork, and the Himalo take a 9mm quick release axle, so they work with the stock wheel. Also, this fork is 150mm inside diameter here, or inside width. The stock is 135mm, so I also had to have a hub that's 150mm. You can get away with an adapter, but since I have to have the 15mm through axle, I just replaced the entire wheel. You could also get away with just replacing the hub and keeping the rim, the stock rim, but then you'd have to relace all of the spokes, which I didn't want to go through that. And so yeah, this fork has been fantastic. I love this fork. The Himalo fork was really good too. I ran into some issues on mine with it not returning from full compression. I probably could have worked that out eventually, but this was on sale, and so I couldn't resist it, and I made the purchase, and I'm very happy with this setup. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like this content. There will be more Swift Horse related content coming soon.